60 kilometers of farmland. On a map, it looks insignificant. But this is the Suwałki Gap, NATO's most fragile lifeline to the Baltic states. If Russian forces close this corridor, alliance reinforcements could be delayed up to 30 days by just a handful of missing bridges and mismatched railways. The critical flaw that could collapse NATO's eastern defenses is real, and almost no one is prepared for what that means next. At first glance, the Suwałki Gap is nothing more than a quiet stretch of countryside. Its fields and forests stretching between Poland's Suwałki region and southern Lithuania. But beneath this rural calm lies a 60-kilometer corridor that military planners have called NATO's Achilles' heel. Flanked to the west by the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, and to the east by Belarus, a close Russian ally, the gap forms the only land bridge connecting the Baltic states to the rest of the alliance. This narrow strip, just 65 kilometers at its widest, threads between heavily militarized borders, with Kaliningrad bristling with Russian troops and advanced weaponry, and Belarus hosting frequent joint drills with Moscow. The terrain itself adds to the vulnerability. Dense forests like the Augustów primeval forest, scattered lakes, and a patchwork of small towns and farmland funnel all major roads and railways through just a handful of choke points. The main highway, Via Baltica, and a single major rail line run north-south, both easily monitored or blocked. Small rivers, including the Maricha and Czarna Hansza, cut across the corridor, their bridges offering few alternatives if destroyed or seized. There are no sprawling cities here, only modest towns like Suwałki, Szczecin, and Łódź, each a potential bottleneck for military convoys or refugees. The entire corridor sits exposed, too short to absorb a major assault, too vital to ignore. On a map, the Suwałki Gap is a thin line. On the ground, it's the fragile hinge on which the security of the Baltics, and perhaps NATO itself, depends. Steel rails stretch from the heart of Germany to the edge of Lithuania, but a hidden obstacle brings everything to a crawl: the difference between two sets of tracks. Trains rolling east from Poland glide on the European standard gauge, 1,435 millimeters wide, until they reach the border, where the rails abruptly widen to the Russian gauge of 1,520 millimeters. Here, at places like Sestokai, Częstochowa, and Mołkowa, every tank, armored vehicle, and supply wagon must stop. Cargo is lifted by crane, transferred to new wagons, or fitted with specialized bogies. Each transfer can take hours per train, even in peacetime. Under surge conditions, bottlenecks multiply. Yards back up, sidings fill, and any disruption can stretch a single handoff into a day or more. The weight of modern armor compounds the problem. A Leopard 2 main battle tank tips the scales at around 62 tons. The American M1 Abrams, closer to 70. Many bridges along the route were never designed for this kind of load. Engineers sometimes limit crossings to one tank at a time, or detour heavy columns to the few reinforced spans, adding precious hours to every movement. If a bridge is damaged or destroyed, rerouting can mean days of delay. Every minute lost at a transfer yard, every tank forced to wait for a bridge, accumulates. NATO planners estimate that, in a contested scenario, moving a heavy brigade from Central Europe to the Baltics could be delayed not by hours, but by 7 to 30 days. For a defending army, these are not just numbers, they are windows of vulnerability, measured in tons and timetables. Wargame analysts have mapped out how quickly the Suwalki Gap could be sealed off if Russian and Belarusian forces moved in tandem. Their models show that, in a worst-case scenario, the corridor could be closed within 30 to 60 hours. That window is barely enough for NATO to mobilize, let alone reinforce the Baltics. During this time, every alternate supply route, whether by air or sea, would be exposed to Kaliningrad's anti-access and area denial weapons. Russian missile systems, stationed in Kaliningrad and Belarus, already cover the Baltic Sea and much of the airspace above it. Transport aircraft and cargo ships would have to run a gauntlet of long-range missiles, electronic warfare, and potential sabotage. If the land bridge is lost, the only options left are narrow, dangerous, and likely to be cut off just as quickly. This is not a theoretical exercise. It's a timeline that NATO planners have watched play out in dozens of computer simulations and live drills. The margin for error is measured in hours, not days. Ambitious plans to fix NATO's eastern bottlenecks often stall long before a single rail is laid or a bridge is reinforced. In 2019, the European Union's Military Mobility Fund was trimmed from 6.5 billion euros to just 1.5 billion euros. Barely enough to patch the most urgent gaps, let alone overhaul the entire corridor. The full cost of projects like Rail Baltica alone runs into the multi-billion euro range, and even that line faces delays and uncertain financing as national governments argue over budgets. For every 100 million allocated, experts estimate that billions more are needed to bring the region up to speed. But money is only part of the problem. NATO's consensus rule means that any major investment or deployment requires agreement from all member states. One hesitant government, or a single national budget cycle, can hold up progress for years. Host countries sometimes push back against permanent foreign troop deployments or the conversion of public infrastructure for military use, citing sovereignty or fears of provoking Moscow. Meanwhile, larger allies in Western Europe often prioritize domestic projects or question the urgency of Eastern upgrades. As political negotiations drag on, the vulnerability of the Suwalki Gap remains, exposed not just by geography or engineering, but by the slow machinery of alliance decision-making. The Suwalki Gap, just 60 to 65 kilometers wide, remains the only land corridor connecting NATO's Baltic members to the rest of the alliance. As documented in NATO mobility assessments, this stretch faces serious logistical barriers, incompatible rail gauges, bridges rated below the weight of modern main battle tanks, and a reinforcement delay estimated between 7 and 30 days. Military experts warn that, in a crisis, this delay could leave the Baltics isolated within 30 to 60 hours, faster than NATO's current ability to respond. Despite these warnings, EU mobility funding stands at roughly 1.5 billion euros, far short of the multi-billion needs for projects like Rail Baltica, which is not expected to be completed before 2030. Consensus rules and national sovereignty debates continue to stall faster action. Many operational details, including specific reinforcement plans, remain classified. The evidence is clear. A single infrastructure flaw could determine the fate of NATO's eastern defenses, and the clock on structural fixes is still ticking.